We're now on Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis. On the bottom of Nun Tes Amud Aleph, we saw the member of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav, that Nivala Shalo Kidarka, Psula Lakuna, meaning Lakoin Gadol, she's no longer Psula, even though she has a Psulin, but the Torah, according to Rav, recognizes the Be'ila Shalo Kidarka as a Be'ila, and that legally endows her with the status of a Be'ula, and therefore she's excluded from a Kohen Gadol. As far as the Kohen Hedjed is concerned, even in a case of Be'ila Kedarka, she would be Kshera, and she's not a Zona, but for Kohen Gadol, there's a high standard, and she's not a Basula, she's a Be'ula, even though physically she is a Basula. And Rava asked a question from a brisa that darshan the pasuk v'lo icha be'icha re'uyalo, prat excluding an almana mina erisin to kohen gadol. And what's the case of almana mina erisin? If it's a case of bia kedarka, then forget about almana. She's already a bu'ula, but it must be shalo kedarka. And the brisa excludes her, disqualifies her from a kohen gadol only because she's an almana. Had she not been an almana, and only a bu'ula because of bila shal kedaka, she would not be excluded. So this is against Rav, who says that nivala shal kedaka itself makes her into a bu'ula and disqualifies her for kahuna. And here we're going to defend Rav and reinterpret this brisa in a way that it doesn't contradict Rav, the top of Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis. And the Gemara answers that yes, the brisa is talking about a case of Shalo Kedarka, but we're talking about an honest Shalo Kedarka, and Hamani, and who is the author of this particular brisa? It's none other than Rabbi Meir. And in a case of an anusas atzmo, which is going to be a sugya that we'll learn, where the Kohen Gadol had this relationship and forced the woman, then he's not allowed to marry her. And this is Rabbi Meir. Now, let's see exactly where Rabbi Meir fits into this picture. We had Rabbi Meir in regard to the drush of the word bisuleha. And we said that bisuleha is a mute because it tells you that you need kol bisuleha, and it excludes a bogeres. So according to Rabbi Meir, a bogeres cannot marry a kohen gadol. Now we darshan the base of bibsuleha, not the yud, but the base, and that's coming to tell you a mute, which is a matir, meaning nivala shalo kedarka, she is muteres. So therefore, the brisa, in a case where she was nensa shalo kedarka, she would not be prohibited because of almana. I'm sorry. That was our diuk in the brisa, mishum almana in be'ula lo, because a be'ula shalo kedarka, according to Rabbi Meir, is muteres l'kohen gadol. But here she was an almana. But Rav doesn't accept Rabbi Meir, but rather he accepts Rabbi Eliezer as a different approach to these various drushos. According to Rabbi Eliezer, the yud of bisuleo, that's the first drasha, the extra yud, is teaching us that a bogeres is muteres l'kohen, just the opposite of Rabbi Meir, and therefore the beis is coming to tell you that a be'ula shalo kedarka is excluded from a kohen gadol. So whereas Rabbi Meir is machmir in bogeres and Mekil in Be'ula Shlo Kedarka, Rabbi Eliezer is Mekil in Bogeres, and he's Machmir to passel a case of Be'ula Shlo Kedarka. Rav happens to stand on the shoulders of Rabbi Elazar. By accepting Rabbi Elazar, he passed that a Be'ula Shelo Kedarka is excluded from a Kohen Gadol. And this is what comes out of Tosfos Dibur Maschil V'Rav, that according to Rabbi Lazar, since he's Mekil, he's Machshir Bogeres, then the din has to be that Be'ula Shelo Kedarka is Psula L'Kohen Gadol. Rabbi Meir, on the other hand, as we said before, is Machmir in Bogeres and Asura L'Kohen Gadol, and therefore he's Mekil, based on the Beis, with Nivala Shelo Kedarka, she's Ksheira L'Kohen. So the Gemara now raises the following objection. Rabbi Elazar, if this sheet of Rav is predicated on Rabbi Elazar, that's how Rav accepted Allah like Rabbi Elazar. So why did Rav say that Nivala Shelo Kedarka Psula L'Kohen Gadol Mishum Be'ula? Why mention Be'ula here? Typically, he could have said that she's Asur L'Kohen Hejot and forget about Kohen Gadol to Havile Zona. So why this Be'ula to Kohen Gadol? She's a Zona. And if Rav accepts Rabbi Elazar, then Rabbi Elazar is of the opinion that Rabbi Elazar, this is Rabbi Elazar later on in Samachal, Ponei Abola Pnuya, Shalol L'Shem Zona. So once she's a Be'ula Shelo Kedarka, and the Torah recognizes Be'ula Shelo Kedarka as Be'ila, hence she becomes a Zona, even if this Be'ila was not in the framework of marriage, because Pani Abola Pnuya Zona. Omer Rav Yosef, Rav is the answer. Now Rav, who says that Be'ula Shelo Kedarka is excluded to Kohen Gadol, he wasn't referring to Nivel al Yedei Adam, because in that case, he would have not limited himself to Kohen Gadol. She would be Psula to any Kohen, Midin Zona. But rather, Higon Shenivel al Behema. She had a Be'ila with a Behema. And here, the Rishonim add Shelo Kedarka. Now, Hasam Mishum Be'ula Ika, Mishum Zona Leka. We have a principle called Ein Znus LeBehema. So the Be'ila of Behema, even if it were Kedarka, would not generate a Shem Zona. And therefore, at worst, she would be Psula L'Kohen Gadol, Midin Be'ula, but not L'Kohen Hedja Midin Zona. So this is the case of Be'ila Shelo Kedarka, of a behema, and the Gemara is going to give a case later on that actually happened. And there's an Iser exclusively to a Kohen Gadol, because she's a Be'ula, because the Be'ila Shelo Kedarka is a Be'ila. But again, we're talking about a behema. Behema, we said, is Ein Znus LeBehema. Amalei Abaye. Abaye raises the obvious objection to Rav Yosef, Mimonav Sham. If you're recognizing the Be'ila of a Behema, and that's why she's Asur L'Kohen Gadol through this Be'ila, then be a Zona as well. Be Zona Lohavya, but you're telling me she's not a Zona according to Rav, and she's not Asura to a Kohen Hedja, but only to a Kohen Gadol towards Be'ula, is then you're saying that there's no Be'ila to a Behema, it's not a recognized Be'ila, and therefore Be'ula Nami Lohavya, she should be Muteris L'Kohen Gadol. And we'll see later on that the Amoram actually accepted La'alacha, this principle that a Be'ula Behema is Muteris L'Kohen Gadol. B'chitema, maybe you'll give us the following answer, that Bilas Behema is not a Bia. That's why she cannot become a Zona. And the reason why she's Asur al Baila, even though the Behema's Bila is not recognized as Be'ila, is Midi Dahavya Mukas Shelo Kedarka. She's no worse than a case of Mukas Eitz Shelo Kedarka. And Rabbi Lazar in the Mishnah said that Mukas Eitz is Asur L'Kohen Gadol. So let's take a break for a minute and go back to the Mishnah. Let's just see. the Mishnah says, "Velo yisa es mukas eitz." That's the last piece of the Mishnah Nun Tesam and Aleph. And the commentary says, "Isa shenaflu besulel yidei makas eitz bioso makah lo yidei bias adam v'tama isur mishum she'ein lo besulel v'Torah amra v'hu isha b'psulel yikach." So the mukas eitz removes her besulin, hence she cannot be married off to a kohen gadol. But here we're talking about mukas eitz shelo kedar. So the Gemara apparently at this point at least holds that a mukas eitz, even if it was shelo kedarka, is psula. Again, I don't know exactly the physiology of it, but somehow through this be'ila with a behema, but shelo kedarka, her besulin was removed. So nivelo behema shelo kedarka is asur l'kohen gadol. So the Gemara rejects this. That's why it says v'chitema. This is not going to be accepted. Why shouldn't it? If you're telling me that even a mukas eitz shelo kedarka is asur l'kohen gadol, then a kohen gadol is not going to be able to marry anyone. Why? Ein lecha isha shekshera l'kuna gedola, because ein lecha isha shelo nasis mukas eitz al yedei tzra. In the old days, they didn't have toilet paper where we have it, so they wiped the back. A sharp stone. They used to sharpen a stone, and they were able to penetrate it. And every woman would become a mukat eitz shelo kedarka. If you're telling me that that's enough to create a shelo kedarka, because he's saying that bila babe, it's not a bila. Hello, Rab Zera. Rab Zera says that you know why Rav prohibits a ba'ula shelo kedarka to a kohen gadol without a psul zona l'kohen hedjod, because he's referring to the following scenario: b'mima'enes. So b'mima'enes means a girl whose father is gone, and she was married off as a kana by her brother or her mother, and then she could walk out of that marriage through miyun and be oker, the kedushin l'mafreya, the marriage, rabbanan, the ishus to rabbanan. Now let's say we have this katana, Yisoma, right? She doesn't have a father. She was married off by her mother or her brother. And she had a be'ila within the framework of that marriage, which is the rabbanan of kedushay miyun, shelo kedarka. That's the only bia she had. So she's not a ba'ula in the physical sense. She would be a ba'ula by virtue of a shem be'ila, which she had with a human being. So her besulin are intact, but she's a ba'ula because she had a be'ila. So that's because shelo kedarka is recognized by the halacha as a be'ila. So Rav now will be machshir this girl after miyun to a kohen hedja and disqualify her for a kohen gadol. Why is that so? Because she's not a grusha that would be excluded from a kohen hedja, because miyun is not the same as gerushin. She doesn't need a get. She's not a zona because the relationship that she had with this be'ila shelo kedarka was with of ishus, and that be'ila would not make her into a zona. She's not an almana, and therefore the reason why Rav disqualifies her to a kohen gadol is not within almana but within ba'ula, because miyun completely undermines the marriage, so she was never married, and she's not an almana. The only possibility is by recognizing halachically the shem bia of bia shelo kedarka that she had, and that gives her the status of a ba'ula l'kohen gadol, not like the case of mukas eitz shelo kedarka, which would not give her a state of status of ba'ula. And there the question might be whether or not the be'ila removes the besulin and therefore the same be'ila. Here, in this, right, that was the case of behema, but in the case of an adam, there's no question that we recognize the be'ila, even though it's shelo kedarka, she's a ba'ula. She has psulim. She's not an almona because miyun removes the issues. And on top to boot, she's not a grusha because miyun replaces kerushin. But nevertheless, she's a ba'ula l'kohen gadol. Now the Gemara goes back to that question of a woman who is nivelis lebehema and whether she's excluded from a kohen gadol. And if we apply the principle of ein zus lebehema, the behema is not capable of a shem bia on a Torah level, therefore she's not a ba'ula and she could marry a kohen gadol. Amar Rav Shimi bar Chia, nivel lebehema. And again, now we're not defending whether it's kedarka or shelo kedarka, sheru lekahuna. She can marry a kohen gadol. She's not a ba'ula. Now, you could ask, well, would she be a mukad eitz? So if this be'ila to be mushalo kedarka, then we saw before that be'ila shalo kedarka of a behema would not make her into a mukad eitz. Well, again, that depends upon Rabbi Lazar in the Mishnah. And in the Havmina, we said that according to Rabbi Lazar, even a mukaseit shalo kedarka is considered a ba'ula, a mukadeis. But lamaskana, let's say not like that. Again, that's shalo kedarka. But now we're talking about nivel al beima filu kedarka. So we must be assuming now, according to that mandiyama, that a mukaseit is allowed to marry a kohen gadol. She's not a ba'ula because there was no be'ila. And the same thing applies in the case of behema. And the be'ila of behema is not called a be'ila, it's mukas eitz, which according to this mandiyama is develops mukas eitz. I'm sorry, be mukas eitz is muteres lekohen gadol. The same thing applies to nivela lebehema. She's muteres lekohen gadol. Tanya nami hachi. The Gemara quotes a brayso to support this. Nivela lemisheno ish, meaning to a behema. Afal pi she beskila shera lekuna. Very paradoxical halacha. On the one hand, if there were Edom and Asra, she'd be put to death with skila for having a relation with an animal. But on the other hand, she's shera lekuna because we're talking about be'ilas behema, and be'ilas behema is ein snutz lebehema. She's shera lekuna. And he writes here in the name of the Meiri, Afal Pishin Iskeles, Lonases Zona Lipasa Lakuna. She's not a Zona, even though she'll be put to death. Again, in the absence of Edom and Asra, then we could say that she survived. She's not going to be put to death. And therefore, he is Shera Lekahuna. Because the Be'ila of Behema is not called a Be'ila. So she's not a Ba'ula. Behema doesn't make her into a Ba'ula. Again, as far as violation is concerned, if they were Edom and Asra, we'd be putting her to death. He also Avdimi Omar, Maise Beriva Achas, Be Haisolu, a place of a young girl in a place called Haisolu. Place of Mechaberes Abayis, she was sweeping the floor, who Rava Kelev, and some sort of large animal called a dog of Kufri came Me'acharea from her back and entered her, Shalo Kedarka, Bechshira Rebbe Lekahuna. What does it mean, Lekahuna? Amar Shmuel, Ula Kohen Gadol. No, it's even for a Kohen Gadol. Meaning not only is she not a Zona, because ain't Znus Lebehema, but she's not even considered a Be'ula, because Be'ilas Kelev is not a Be'ila. So you're wondering, according to these shitos here, mentioned here in the name of Shmuel, etc., what would be if the Kelev had a Be'ila with her Kedarka? Would she be a Mukas Eitz? And then you get into the question of whether a Mukas Eitz is disqualified from a Kohen Gadol. Now it's interesting because it says here, Shira Rebbe Lakuna, which literally means that Rebbe himself, Haskin, that she could marry a Kohen Gadol. that's strange because Rebbe lived generations after the Churban. There was no Kohen Gadol. So that's the Gemara's question now. Bimei Rebbe Kohen Gadol bi'ahavi ella re'uya leKohen Gadol. She could marry a Kohen Gadol if she bana beis hamikdash. Amalei Rava mi Parkin. Rava from Parkin spoke to Rav Ashi, Minaha Milsa Yom Rabbana. From whence did the Rabbana derive the conclusion that Ain's Nutzla Behema? So therefore, a woman who had a Be'ilah to Behema, and it doesn't matter whether it's Kedarka or Shalom Kedarka, she's not considered a Zona, she's not excluded and disqualified from Kahuna because it's not a Zona since Ain's Nutzla Behema. And this also has repercussions about a married woman if she, within the framework of marriage, she had a willing be'ila with animal, bestiality, she would still be muteris labaila. Again, if there were Edom and Asra, she's kind of Lisa, but in the absence of Edom and Asra, she's allowed to marry Baila, remain married to Baila because Ain's Nus L'Be'ema. And Rav Ashi has a very sophisticated drasha now to derive this conclusion of Ain's Nus L'Be'ema. Lo savi esnan zona mechir kelev beis Hashem. So notice that the Torah emphasizes esnan zona, stop, and mechir kelev. It doesn't say anything about esnan kelev or mechir zona. So you cannot bring as a korban an esnan zona. That means a man gave a tlef, for example, to a zona as payment for znus. That tlef becomes disqualified. And mechir kelev means that he swapped a tlef for a kelev, right? In a chalipin situation. And therefore, this tleh that was swapped, exchanged for a kelev, is excluded. Now we're going to ask the flip side. Utnan is the mission at the end of Tamura, that only in those specific cases of esnan zona mechir kelev is it possible in this way. What about another fluky case of esnan kelev, which means a person has payment to a zona, instead of giving the zona tleh, a person says to a zona, take this tleh and have a relationship with my daughter. So this is called esnan kelev, where the tleh is being given as payment to his nus of a kelev. That's esnan kelev, not indicated in the Mishnah. I'm sorry, in the Torah. And therefore, the Mishnah that this esnan kelev, this tleh, would be kosher to the mizbeach. Now we have another case of mechir zona, which is not written in the Torah, and what happens is that he has a shivcha who's a zona, and we're talking about mechir. Mechir means an exchange, a barter deal. So he barters for this zona a tleh. So it's not like the case of mechir kelev, where you give the tleh and you get back in return in exchange a kelev, but rather you give a shivcha and you get back a tleh. Mutar. In all these cases, the tleh is kashel mizbeach shenemar gam shneim. Right. The pasuk concludes by saying gam shneim, two extra words. And Chazal see this as a mute. It's logically you could have switched it around and said that, esnan kelev mechir zona would also be possible in this pair. But no, the Torah has a special mute that says shnayim, meaning these two shnayim of esnan zona and mechir kelev, below arba, but not esnan kelev and mechir zona. Now, we see that there's no chalushem esnan on a tleh that's being paid as payment for the be'ilah of a kelev. So once again, a man says to his zona, I want you to have a be'ilah with my kelev, and I'm going to give you a tleh as payment. That tleh is not considered an esna. Why? Because it's only payment for a be'ilah to a behema. And a be'ilah to a behema is not considered a be'ilah. Hence, we derive the conclusion that ein znus behema, very sophisticated drasha and yalfusa of Ravash. Tana Rabbanan, we learned to the Brisa, nusas atzmo mafutas atzmo. When Gadol raped a woman, never, or he seduced a woman, and this could be a woman who's not married. Lo yisosa, he's not allowed to marry, because the Torah says he's got to marry a besula, which means that when he marries her, it says yikach besula me'av yikach isha. It means at the time of the lakicha, she's got to be a besula. Now, wait, by the time he gets to marry her, she's already a bu'ula. But again, she became a bu'ula not through someone else's bi'ula, but through the Kohen Gadol's bi'ula himself. And now we say, be'im nasa nasu. But if he went ahead and married her, we're not going to obligate him, we'll see how the Gemara interprets this, to give her a get, to bust up the marriage. But anusas chaver, that's already on a different level. She was raped by someone else. And so too, umefutas chavero, she was seduced by another man. She's ba'ula al yidei adam acher, not al yidei atzmo. Then lo yisavim nasa chayav lo tzir. Now, what's the status of a vlad? If a vlad is born from this illegitimate marriage of anusas chavero or mefutas chavero, that's machlokas no. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Vlad Chalol, because the Vlad was born from Psule Kahuna, right? Because we're talking about a Ba'ula, the Kohen Gadol. V'chachom Omer Vlad Kosher. The Vlad is not a Chalol. So the Gemara explains the following. First of all, when it says im nasa, and we're talking about anusas atzmo and frutas atzmo nasa nasui, and we thought that will allow the Kohen Gadol to live with this woman, continue to live with this woman if he went and he married her. No, that's what it means. That's umotzi the get. He's not allowed to remain married to her. He has to give her a get. So the Gemara immediately asks, the Ella hadik party, it says im nasa nasui, is my nafkamina. What does it mean nasa nasu? If you're telling me that he's not allowed to be mekayim and he has to give her a get. Omar of Achbar Yaakov Lomar, when it says nasa nasu, what it means to tell me, and here we'll take a look at the top of Daf Sama, she'ein mishalim knas limafuto. Now, minat Torah, a mefat has to pay a knas, but under what circumstances? The Torah says with Yifate, this is in Parashas Mishpat, Yifate each besula ashalo or asav shachavima moharya marena lo leisha. He's obligated to marry. And in the case of ones, in Parashas we see the same thing. V'lo sia leisha tachser ina lo yuchal shal yom. However, let's say in certain scenarios he will not marry. Like, for example, if her father refuses to marry her off to this ma'anes or this mafata, and that's written in the parasha in Moyin, Yemayna Viola Seisla. So that's a case where the father rejects the marriage. And then we have a case where she herself rejects the marriage. Because it says, V'lo sia le'isha, he has to marry her, midaita. She doesn't want to marry him. There's no marriage balkar. Now, in all those scenarios where the marriage is not going to happen, then the Torah says that he has to pay a knas. So let's say a mafata has to pay a knas in event that her father or she objects to the marriage. And now, if a Kohen Gadol married a woman that he himself had seduced, he doesn't pay the knas because he's marrying, right? And we said that the knas is only a penalty is instituted in event that there's no marriage. In a mafata shalonos as a mafuta, then he pays chamishim kesef knas. But if he marries, so he doesn't pay the knas, and that's what the Torah means in Parshas Mishpatim. Ima'ein avil asesta lo kesef yishkol kamar absulos. But if he marries, so he's potum in a knas. And here, since the Kohen Gadol is marrying the Zoma Futa, therefore he's potum in a knas. Now, in the case of Ones, even if he marries her, he still has to pay the knas. Because in Parshas, he pays it, the Torah says, V'nasana isha sholchei v'imo lavia naro chamishim kesef v'lo sia le'isha. So the Torah is outspoken about the fact that he has to pay the chamishim kesef knas even if he is marrying. But in the case of Mefutas Atzma, the Kohen Gadol is marrying her, therefore he's part of him. And that's how the Gemara interprets im nasa nasu, meaning that even though we're going to force him to divorce his wife, and that's because she's a Ba'ula who's Psula the Kohen Gadol, and he cannot remain married to her, nevertheless, the marriage is chal. He has to divorce her. So once the marriage is chal, he patches himself up from a knas. Okay, and so this is where we'll stop today, and tomorrow, B'ez Hashem, we'll pick up with Ozil Rav Gevia, and that will be Daf Sam, on the top of Daf Sam.